Dr. Miller making a video on drop sets, or drop sets meaning one, making this as part of our video series on repetition strategy, so how you could set up repetitions within a set. If you haven't seen the other two I put up so far, cluster set or sets, and cluster reps as well, and myo reps is traditionally called, or myo set. Traditionally it's just one. You can look at those videos. Similar format as this one. I have the size principle motor unit recruitment here shown in this little figure. So our big type X fibers, if they're there, hybrids are not shown, type 2As and 1s, and just trying to look at what's going on with these different approaches. If you like this video, be sure to like it. If you like to hear more about these topics in exercise, sports science, nutrition science, I put up lots of videos relating to these areas. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell as well. And of course, if you have a comment, drop it in the bottom there. Okay, let's talk about drop sets, or drop set, meaning one. Like, how are they useful? So I'm going to talk about a drop set in this particular video in the context of dropping the intensity, increasing the volume. Okay, you can have sets where you drop down in the volume but maintain the intensity. So you might be traveling. I'm just going to use this example. You might hit a set of 6. At a given intensity, let's say 77.5%. And then you're pushing hard up to 80% at 6, and then you're going to hit 80% again, but you're going to drop the volume down to 3. Okay, so that's a drop set in a sense of you're dropping the volume. What I'm talking about here is this idea of increasing the volume by dropping the intensity. Okay, and most of the time when people refer to drop sets or drop set, they're thinking about how to bolster the total volume in a training session in order to see skeletal muscle hypertrophy. Now, if you've seen the video I put up about non-functional versus functional hypertrophy, most of the time when we talk about drop set, we're looking towards the non-functional hypertrophy side. Again, I hate that term just because it's all hypertrophy is functional, but it's more psychoplasmic. In other words, it's more about the size of the muscle and the ability to buffer fatigue or fend off fatigue than it is about increasing the amount of strength per cross-sectional area. It doesn't mean it doesn't strength per cross-sectional area doesn't happen. It just means it's not what's being targeted per se. So it's great for work capacity type of things is what I'm getting at, just general size. So if your individual is like, man, I need to get stronger and bigger, or I need to get stronger and improve my work capacity, a drop set might be a good idea. So how could this look in training? What's a bifocused training session, or even a trifocused? Well, remember our 3 different types of ways of getting to the big motor units are dynamic, maximal, and repetition. So dynamic and maximal, the idea is not to knock out these motor units as you go along, but to either move fast or lift something heavy, and you recruit all of them, and so you get more of a neurological response. So these fibers, motor units, learn how to play together. They synchronize both inside the muscle and the muscles together, right? And that's what we call technique in a lot of ways. Is this synchronization that occurs? Well, if you knock out any of these motor units, they can't. It's like having missing your outfield in baseball, or akin to missing parts of a symphony. It's hard to play together and learn how to play together when there's pieces of the team missing. Okay, and so those type of methods focus on that. With the repetition method, according to one study, for some people they only get up into the type 2A fibers, and they never reach the big fibers, and they just kind of play tag team wrestling back and forth until they run out of tag team partners. But the old way of looking at this is that we just fatigue, right, submaximal, and we tend to climb up the size principle until we get towards the latter part of a set, maybe a 12, 15 rep set, and now we have to recruit these higher threshold motor units in order to continue the work, and keep the barbell moving, whatever it might be. So we fully train all the fibers in the sense of more of a metabolic type of situation. And so when a bifocused training session with a drop set, how that could look is doing a set of 3x5, more maximal focus, not assuming warm up, 2 to fail, and then dropping down and doing 2 sets of 12 with shorter rest periods, or just long enough to maintain the training stimulus. But obviously the intensity is dropped, still 2 to fail, maybe 1 to fail. But now you're doing higher rep sets. So you're working on 2 things. You're working on maximal, and then you're working on the repetition method. You're working on getting stronger, which, again, 3 sets of 5 will get your muscles bigger. It's just going to take longer because the volume is lower. And the stimulus is more about accruing fibrils than it is about accruing volume to fend off fatigue. So it's just a different training stimulus. So a drop set in this way can work. Now, I've heard it said, don't do that, right? I've heard coaches say, don't do that. Don't mix the training stimuli. I don't know why. I've thought about this. I really have for a long time. I'm trying to figure out why that is. And I'm going to propose the reason why, but it's not physiological, okay? It's at least not directly. One thing you wouldn't want to do, if maximal is your focus, is to do the drop sets first, right? They're not really drop sets anyway. They're more like pre-fatiguing sets. Okay, you wouldn't do your 2 sets of 15, then hit the maximal work, because at that point you may have knocked out some of these motor units that are gone when you're trying to do your maximal work. You're not going to be able to lift as heavy of a weight, and there's obviously not going to be as much coordination going on because you're missing your outfield. Okay, so this is where a drop set, is not turned into a pre-fatigue, a pre-exhaustion type of set. Okay, there may be value in that. That's debatable, but we can get into that in another video. Okay, so a drop set, that's how it could look. Now you can mix drop sets in with, the 3x5 can be mixed in with volume, but drop sets, the way I'm defining drop sets here, but you're going to have mixed fatigue with maximal training, and that doesn't seem like a wise approach. I would agree with that. So you don't do a set of 5, then a set of 15, a set of 5, and then a set of 10. Now there's wave training out there, and we'll talk about wave training. Well, of course there's wave training out there. We're going to talk about wave training, and it is a way of manipulating volume or intensity or both, in order to bolster maximal or dynamic productivity. But in terms of mixing maximal or dynamic with volume or a repetition type of training, that probably wasn't a good idea. I won't say probably, I say it isn't a good idea, especially if maximal is your goal. In other words, getting stronger is your goal. That wouldn't be a wise thing to do, in my opinion. Okay, maybe somebody has a better opinion than mine. There's many people a lot smarter than I am, so I'll move out of the way if there's a better idea out there. But that's how I see it in terms of physiology. There's not a lot of research, by the way, on this, and like drop sets directly. You're going to have to assess it. Like I'll skip to my last point. Does it work? Well, physiologically, I'm explaining why it can work. But does it work better than other forms of training? Well, we have to kind of use our critical thinking skills to work through that. And so I'm going to bump up now to point number 3 then, and related to number 1. How is a drop set beneficial then? It can produce biofocused training. Well, because of that, biofocused training, the problem is that you've mixed your training stimuli. So physiologically, the neurological system has no idea what you're trying to do. It just does what it's told. However, when it comes to total training stimulus, this is where it could be challenging. Okay, so if you try to do drop sets, let's say you're going to do a particular movement, let's say, I'm just going to say bench press to keep it simple. If you try to do bench in this manner twice a week, it's probably going to accrue fatigue to the point with doing these drop sets that you're going to see a negative effect on the subsequent training session. So you do this on day 1, and then day 2, maybe it's even 3 or 4 days later, you try this again, you're going to be picking up fatigue. It'd be akin to doing a volume session before a maximal session in the week. It also is splitting the focus, so you're only getting 2 sets of hypertrophy in on one, with the drop set usage, and you're only getting 3 sets of 5 or maximal work on the split focus type of session. So you could argue, why don't you just do a session of maximal training? I'm guessing this is where this argument comes from, not to do the drop set work. But you could do a session where you do only maximal work, maybe 4 sets of 5 instead of 3. Maybe it's ascending pyramid of some sort, and then on the second day, you do 4 sets of 10, or 4 sets of 12, or whatever. It's more of a volume type approach. That can work as well. The argument against that is the frequency isn't enough. But in that setup, the stimulus for both sessions is focused, and it's going to be higher. And the fatigue carried from one session to the next should be lower. So you're not carrying all the volume fatigue from the first session, because it was maximal, into the second session and trying to do more maximal work. Okay, you divide the stimuli. And for a more advanced trainee, that could be a good idea. All right? For somebody, and this is what I'm framing this drop set usage in this particular context in, is that somebody that's more, now I wouldn't say a novice, but somebody who's a new lifter, meaning they've gone through a general ramp already and they've already seen some good gains and they're ready for something a little bit more in terms of volume. They need to up their volume and maximal work. So they can still divide their training stimuli, but they're not to the point where they have to, not to the point where the fatigue is going to be so high that they can't continue to do something like this. So a drop set for them might be a good idea. It could be just one drop set. But for the advanced lifter, it might be better if you divide the sessions, just so the stimuli can be more focused. So you have a maximal session, then a volume session, and you don't carry the fatigue from that first maximal session as high as you would into the volume session. Probably not doing it the other way around. Now, to the time efficient point though, let's start with our advanced lifter again though. Let's say that they're in a focused block of training, doing maximal type of training, and they want to add in some volume though to maintain hypertrophy, at least with this more high volume type of work, or even work capacity through the barbell. But what they could do then is do a drop set on the second day only. So they might do 2 maximal sessions perhaps. There's a lot of variables here we can manipulate. Let's just keep it simple. 2 maximal sessions, and then on that second maximal session follow up with a couple drop sets to finish the week with like a finisher, or even use a myo reps, a type of approach, but some sort of finisher where you have a drop in intensity and a rapid increase in volume. That could be beneficial, and that could be time efficient, so you're not devoting a whole training day to maintaining hypertrophy. Okay, you're just devoting 1 or 2 sets to it, And yeah, you're not going to gain a whole lot, but you're just trying to do enough to maintain some of those muscle qualities that have been developed through previous hypertrophy training. In the individual that is not an advanced individual, this could be a good idea as well. Same thing, but that it's going to be time efficient to work in the volume. But since they're not as advanced, the fatigue carry won't be as bad from, like we've talked about, from session to session. So very time efficient way to do things is to use a drop set. So that's in the context of, maximal versus repetition method, or dynamic versus repetition method. What about if you're just doing all repetition method? So you're doing sets of 12 and you're working a couple sets of 20. Okay, is there value in that? Well, if the goal is total volume, yeah, there could be value in that, doing something like that as well. And this is where you could mix in the two different intensities. So you can mix in, let's say, sets of 12. Let's say your goal was to do 5 sets of 12. So if you did that in a way that, hey, I'm not going to let the intensity drop though. Okay, well, it's going to drop. Over 5 sets of 12, it's going to drop. Even if you have adequate rest, it's going to drop. And so your volume then is going to start to be sacrificed. You could say, well, I'm going to make up for that volume with some drop set work at the end. So it's kind of mixing the maximal volume or maximal repetition methods, but your focus across both repetition ranges was still repetition. So yes, you're going to accrue some fatigue, but not a big deal, because the idea is that it was just about volume anyway. So you do your set of 12, you do your set of 20, you do your set of 12, you do your set of 20, both due to fail. You could work in the extra volume that way. Your 12 rep sets are going to suffer anyway, and the 20 reps are certainly going to make that happen faster. But you could work in the volume in such a way, okay, instead of just doing the 20 rep sets after. Now, again, I don't think that's the best way to do things, especially if you're trying to maintain the intensity of the 12 rep sets. If you adjusted the intensity to the 12 rep sets, every time it needed adjusted, it would still be higher than the 20 rep set. So what you're essentially doing is you're mixing in the intensity with the volume. So one set is more volume focused, like the 20 rep, and one is more intensity focused at the 12 rep. Even if the load has to drop on the 12 rep sets because of the accruing fatigue that's happening from those 20 rep sets. And obviously 20 rep sets, you're going to have to drop the load as well. Okay. You just have to look at that and say, all right, is this really effective? What's my goal? To gain mass. Well, are you ramping up so much fatigue that you're just moving at that point, right? You're not really seeing any progress anymore in terms of like providing enough tension. Even though the time is really high, if we thought about in terms of volume intensity, you're still maybe just I hate the word junk volume, but in a way that's what you're doing. You're just piling on fatigue without much of a stimulus. So I don't know if that type of approach would be effective with the use of drop set. And to be honest with you, I haven't seen that used very often. But I just want to throw out that it is an option. Now, if you did your 3 sets of 12, maintain the intensity throughout, and then drop down for 2 sets of 20, sure. That would make a little bit more sense. Okay? So those are some different configurations. And it's time efficient, by the way. You could, blast that extra volume in there, those 2 sets of 20 at the end. Working in a hypertrophy session anyway, you're going to drop down and get even more volume in that particular session. So you had a block of training that was more intensity focused. You did your sets of 12. Now you're going to drop down and do sets of 20 just to increase the volume as much as possible, perhaps possible even within the boundaries of what you've already been working in terms of your volume from last week, last cycle, whatever. That's how you're going to get the volume in here. Okay. You're also potentially working across the spectrum of motor unit recruitment. So those 20 rep sets are going to be more focused in this lower bandwidth, right, initially. So hypothetically, be working out more of those type 1 fibers than you would be with the 12 rep sets, which may be somewhere drifting towards the type 2As a little bit more. All right. Again, just watching fatigue. And if you've never attempted this before, drop set may be completely unnecessary because the fatigue that's gained from doing that type of extra volume is just fatigue. It's not really going to provide any stimulus. So there is a huge it depends factor when it comes to who are we talking about. Do you need a drop set? That's why I'm saying, for advanced trainings, this could be a great way to add in some volume, right? For the intermediate person, it could be a good person. Intermediate to a novice could be okay when you're splitting the focus, your maximum volume and working in both. But when you double up and you're doing repetition method for both, this is probably for somebody who can tolerate 5 to 6 rep sets already for a particular movement pattern. And at that point, it might be better to look at if I'm at 5 to 6 sets of a particular, exercise like a bench or something, it might be better to move to another exercise in the same pattern. This is my own training philosophy. Once you hit 5 sets of a particular exercise, you can work in the same pattern but switch the exercise. So if you're doing bench, supplement it with some chest work, whatever that could be. You pick something, all the different chest exercises, or even triceps work if the bench is that whole muscle group that's involved with the bench is what you're trying to target. Or a different form of benching, like an incline, dumbbell incline, or something like that. It'd be better to switch and do a couple of drop sets with a different exercise than just straight up keep just hammering the volume up to 8 sets with these drop sets. Just get it done. Okay, so lots of variables here, lots of configurations. Just wanted to talk about drop sets a little bit, drop set if there's only one, and how we manipulate the neurological system, how we manipulate the size principle of motor unit recruitment. And how drop sets can be a very time efficient and effective tool, but you have to evaluate if it's necessary, right? If it's necessary, what are your goals? How does it fit within where you are currently in your training program? Is it just going to add more fatigue for the sake of adding fatigue? Is it going to be valuable for work capacity training? I didn't talk a whole lot about that, but it's the same idea. Maybe you are using it as a conditioning stimulus after your maximum work. That's fine. You just have to have that. This is what I'm using this for, understanding the fatigue that's associated, and knowing what you have to do later in the week in order to position a drop set effectively. So hopefully you find that valuable. I'm sure there's some holes that I didn't cover, some things I could talk about, but if I do, it's going to be an hour-long video, and nobody wants to listen to an hour on drop set configuration. So if you have any comments, let me know. If I said anything absurd, it's probably all true.